So it is an absolute delight to be here in the city of sisterly love, which probably is a really good place to have this discussion. And I call it a discussion and conversation because I hope it actually stimulates some thought. And as Jay mentioned, I mean, I am not an STM publishing executive by background. Only been in the industry all of 18 months. I was a telecom person for entirely too many years, 20 plus years. I can't give you the exact number of years because that discloses your age. And Jackie always said a woman should never disclose her age nor her weight, so I'm not going to tell you that. But after Verizon, I went to work at Blackboard and then Rosetta Stone. And it's just interesting when you work with different industries, some of the parallels that you see. And so it was kind of fascinating when Darrell reached out to me and wanted to know if I would be interested in keynoting this event. And my first thought was, why is he reaching out to me to ask? I mean, all you guys are industry experts. I am not an industry expert. What do I have to say? So that was my first thought. Then my second thought was, oh goodness, when I was in Frankfurt back in October, I told Darrell he looked like Denzel Washington to me, so I know he really likes me, and so that's why he wanted me here to share that, to make sure all of you know that he looks like Denzel Washington. But after talking to Darrell, it was a really good conversation where he said, you know, Judy, I think it's really good to bring a fresh perspective, and I think people would benefit from hearing your views being new to the industry. And then I talked to Jay and other peers from Wiley, and let me make it real clear. I work for Jay. Jay doesn't work for me. I'll make that very clear. And the comments were, no, you need to go ahead and do this because there are some very interesting parallels that I think we could all learn from. So that's the genesis of today. And let me carry this clicker here. OK. So what I really wanted to start and talk about a bit, and it's fascinating to me because the STM publishing industry really is so dramatically different than any industry that I've ever been in for a lot of reasons. But there's a big but here. There are such interesting parallels that I would have never expected or anticipated. And let me just flip, and I'm going to give you some interesting examples comparing to telecom, which sounds bizarre, but as I get through the discussion today, I think you'll see some of the interesting parallels, and hopefully it provokes some thought. But when you think about, I was at Verizon, I was in the landline business, you know, the wire line with the phones hooked to the wall. That's where I came from. And basically, that business, it was a subscription business, high margin. You had majority share in the marketplace, and you had a captive audience. They needed your service. You were a utility. They couldn't get by without you. So fast forward, I'm now with Wiley. Subscription business, high margin, really small competitive set. You actually deliver a service that in some ways, the content you deliver is a bit like a utility or water or phone service or gas. Our customers need to have it. So really interesting parallels just there. So as I think about all that stuff, and there's a lot of interesting lessons learned because, let's face it, the telecom industry has gone through dramatic disruption. And interestingly, every single industry I have been in has gone through dramatic disruption. And I found it kind of fascinating in the STM world. A lot of people don't like to say that word disruption like it's a four-letter word. It's a fact of our world. And so I just wanted to share, kind of to stimulate some thought, kind of an interesting, compelling statistic that I just love. So in 1935, the average life expectancy of an S&P 500 company was 90 years. Fast forward to 2010. 14 years is the average life expectancy of an S&P 500 company. I mean, think about that and what it means. And even though there isn't a new number for 2018, the expectation is that 14 is actually dropping down. So what does that tell you? I mean, what does that tell us in terms of what we need to do and how we need to think to future-proof our business? So anyway, I just use this as a stage setter because I think it is really important to think very differently. And so what I'm going to talk about today, really going to kind of chunk it into 4 different areas. I wanted to start and talk a bit about disruption, that 4-letter word in our market. And I'll compare to some of the disruption that I've seen elsewhere and how it was handled. And then talk to a playbook. And again, really interestingly, you'll find as I go through the discussion, Verizon did remarkably well navigating through disruption. And even though different industry, with the similarities I talked about, there's a really good playbook that emerged that I think could help all of us or be food for thought. I want to hit on the concept of North Star. North Star being what is that thing that grounds you and that guides you. And my contention, you'll see as we go through it, needs to be the customer. And then the last point, set up a discussion for food for thought in terms of collaboration. And how does collaboration play a role in enabling a sustainable future for all of us? So that's kind of the genesis of my discussion. So I wanted to start, and I want with kind of a couple compelling slides that set the stage for some of the challenges that we're dealing with in the industry. And so I'm gonna basically end up reading this to you, but this is a study that comes from a marketing research firm that's really creatively called Research Information. But anyway, they published a report, the Scholarly Publishing Research Cycle Report. And try to say that 5 times fast, it doesn't work. But anyway, I'm going to read this to you because I think it's so important. But the assessment from this report was that researchers are not getting, quotes, parentheses, legal access to the resources they need. Publishers are being vilified, rightly or wrongly. And libraries are feeling increasingly powerless to provide services their users require. So just think about that. And if you agree with that, it basically tells us that the system that we are all operating in is failing miserably. That's what it tells us. But I also think it tells us there's a really interesting inflection point of opportunity, which we'll talk about further. But I'm going to add an exclamation point to this in terms of another, recent experience. So about a month ago in London, Wiley had its Society Executive Seminar. And we had a really good keynote speaker, Terrence Moray, who's an innovation specialist, really fascinating guy, and set the stage really well for the day. And then when he opened it up for questions, the very first question was this one. And this came from a society leader who is both a researcher and an editor-in-chief. And he said, how much longer do you think the scholarly publishing industry could continue to exploit the academic community by taking their work without paying them and then reselling it to their own institutions or making them pay huge APCs for the right to publish open access? That was the first question. And we were like, whoa, this is going to be a really exciting day. And it was. And then last week, I had the opportunity to do a keynote in Turkey at the ANKOS conference. And I went through my whole presentation talking about what's going on in the industry. And the first question I had was really very similar to this. And I should say, I think it was really similar to that. The guy who asked the question had the strongest accent you can ever imagine that I was puzzled whether he's really talking English or Turkish. But I could tell by his really red face, his waving arms, and kind of like a bit angry gestures. And then there were a few words that jumped out like OA and APC that I knew he was somewhat asking this question. So again, that was in Turkey. But seriously, when you think about that, and I would call it a bit of a venom in our market against publishers, I think we need to take that as a really important wake-up call that there's stuff that we need to do differently. I mean, when your customers or key stakeholders really dislike you or have a negative passion towards you and what you do, that is an issue. It's a big issue. And I just wanted to share a story from my Blackboard days. This is a fascinating story because I went to Blackboard after I'd been at Verizon, and I was really used to Verizon was maniacal about customer satisfaction. I mean, you lived or died by your customer sat scores. And believe me, that was a journey. The telcos had the worst customer satisfaction known to man and started to get really smart that we've got to do a lot better. Was it perfect? No, but there was an intense focus on driving it, and people's paychecks got dramatically impacted by that. So anyway, fast forward, I'm at Blackboard. And I'm at Blackboard just a short amount of time, and I go to EDUCAUSE, which is one of the big education conferences. And being a new person, I'd never been in ed tech before, ever. Never dealt with higher ed as a segment. So of course, at this conference, I want to get out, I want to talk to as many customers as possible. I talked to a lot of CIOs, heads of ICT, even talked to the president of the University of Wisconsin, and a lot of customers, both formally and informally. And I was shocked by how negative they were towards Blackboard, like really negative. It concerned the heck out of me. So I go to my boss, Michael Chasen, who is the CEO and founder of Blackboard. I said, Michael, I think we have a real issue here. He's like, yeah, Judy, what's the problem? And I said, our customers hate us. He said, well, why do you say that? And so I went through all the feedback that I'd received, and there was a couple key points to the feedback, and there's parallels here. One point was that Blackboard, which really was the start of the learning management system space, that was developed in conjunction with Cornell University by Cornell University computer scientists, okay? So the belief was this should be owned by higher education. Why should we be paying for it? We helped build it. So the IP should not belong to Blackboard. And then on top of that, customer service issues, they hated there was a lot of bugs in the product, and it really didn't successfully meet the needs that they had. So a lot of stuff. So I shared that with Michael, and his comment was to me, he goes, Judy, you don't know the space. Academics hate everybody. And those are his words, academics hate everybody. And he said, and plus, we have a 94% renewal rate, so how bad can it be? And I said, you know what? Yeah, I'm new to this space, but academics are people, and if people feel that passionately, I think there's an issue, and that issue could lead to huge challenges. So if you don't mind, Blackboard had never done a customer sat survey. I said, I'm going to get an external firm, do a customer satisfaction survey, and understand better, what really is going on here. Got the survey results back, and I'll fast forward through this. And the president of the market research company that I used to do the survey actually physically came to my office to sit down with me because the results were so disturbing. And his comment to me was, number one, I'd never seen such bad results for a company that's still in business and seems to be actually doing well. That was number one. And then he said, number two, if you don't do something very different, your company is going to have significant issues. So I played back Michael. So I said, but we have 94% renewal rates, which is good in the SaaS space. I said, so how bad can it be? And his comment was, and this kind of lays in, he goes, what you're dealing with is a thing called trapped loyalty, which basically means when the pain of going actually exceeds the pain of staying, customers will stay with you. And his final point to me was that there's going to be a smart company that figures out how to do migrations in a less painful way, and Blackboard's going to have issues. And fast forward, Canvas Instructure, a lot of you have probably heard of them, has taken an amazing amount of share away from Blackboard. So, and again, the reason I use that is just a powerful story that if your customers don't like you, they're going to be looking for alternatives. And I think we as an industry need to look at this very seriously in terms of what we do. So that's kind of from hardcore from a customer perspective. I think we all know there's loads going on from a macro level when you look at this industry, and Jay hit on the pace of change that is taking place. And to me, I've been with Wiley 18 months. The last 9 months in the acceleration and the disruption and the changes that are going on has far surpassed what I initially saw. But to me, there's a few key things going on. One, we know that our scholarly publishing world, it's a global world. I mean, when you look at how much money is spent from an R&D perspective, it has actually doubled in the past 15 years, and it's $2 trillion is what R&D spend is. But a lot of that is now kind of transitioning over to a lot of these more global emerging economies are really driving that. Like China. I mean, China last year has exceeded the US from an R&D spend perspective, as we all know, in article output. So you see some changes going on between global and regional, and that obviously has impact on us and our business. Technology is a huge driver of change. I mean, my core belief, and it's always been this way, that people expect professionally the technology to meet their needs the same way they do in their personal use. So when you think about when you're using technology personally for search or commerce, how simple and seamless and easy it is, that is the expectation people have for their professional lives. And a lot of that even getting the communications down so it's enabled for a mobile phone in a very good way. Especially when you start looking at young researchers and young librarians, they're incredibly focused that way. So we have to make sure that we are thinking about the researcher or customer as a total person, not just a professional, as we think about how we're going to meet their needs, because their expectation levels are very different. Lastly, I guess almost last, the evolving research system. I mean, everyone knows what's going on here. I mean, competition is increasing, output is increasing. reward systems kind of going more upstream. You basically see an elevated role of governments and funders, so a lot of changes taking place there. And then on top of all that, this really strong push for open science. And open science is not just open access, as we all know. It's not a business model. It's about open data, open standards, open collaboration, open reward system. So a big push from our community to this whole concept of openness. So this is all the stuff kind of going on, really summarized at a macro level, that tell us, if you read the tea leaves, there's a tremendous amount of change going on. And with the tremendous amount of change going on, do you stand still? Does business as usual cut it? So basically, what does that mean for us as publishers? I mean, how can we be successful in a world that's more global, more technology-enabled, and more open? And what do we need to do differently? I mean, do we react to what's going on, or do we proact? And I'll tell you, for me, I am a hardcore person focused on being very proactive. I don't want to be in the passenger seat. I want to be in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel and my foot on the gas. You don't want to be in my car when I'm driving based upon all the speeding tickets I have, but I want to make sure I am actually, or we are actually driving. So basically what I'm going to lay out to you, I think there's an opportunity to look at this market in a different way. And I'm going to share with you kind of a high-level playbook and kind of interweave how I've seen it play out really well that's had an impact. But the playbook is, first and foremost, you need to have a really compelling vision for the future. And that compelling vision has to ensure you're playing the long game, not the short game. And a lot of us, especially if you're a public company, you've got a board of directors, lots of times you're pushed into a short game. Successful companies don't play a short game. You can't, especially with the way the world's changing. You have to have, and Jason hit on this up front too, you have to have a clear North Star, and it has to be your customer that guides you, grounds you, and focuses you. And lastly, and this is kind of, and I'm going to end the discussion today, I think you need to have a view of when it makes sense to compete versus when it makes sense to collaborate. And I think there's tremendous opportunities here for us as an industry. So, a compelling vision for the future with a strategy for the long game. What are the, I'm going to put them all up here and then talk to it. So basically when I look at it, and this is interesting because this was the Verizon playbook in terms of a strategic playbook in terms of how to deal for the future. And I had no idea when I was there how truly masterful it was until you actually step back and look what was done and what was accomplished and how wickedly smart it was in so many ways. Was it perfect? No way. But did it build a sustainable, innovative, different company from a telephone company? Holy crap, absolutely yes. So first and foremost, I mean, that strategy is you got to invest in businesses that could disrupt your existing business. Boy, is that a tough decision to make. You got to pursue adjacencies, and I think anyone who's managed product life cycles or product portfolio, you know when your product is getting to the back end of the life cycle, in that cash cow stage, if you are not focused in investing in adjacencies to ramp up, you're going to have struggles from both a top line and a bottom line perspective. Then the last part, and this is always really can be very difficult because there's such a tendency to want to hold on to the old. You've got to continually reevaluate and innovate on your existing business and realize that is changing. And so, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through kind of parallels in terms of what Verizon did to just stimulate your thought, and hopefully it helps all of us as we think about the future and how to build it. But this investing in businesses that could disrupt your existing business. So I mentioned I was on the wireline side at Verizon. Okay, we all know customers don't want to be tethered to their home, connected to a wall or a table or something, a physical premise, in order to communicate. Customers wanted, needed, anytime, anywhere communication, absolutely. And so Verizon's core business, the bulk of their revenues came from this landline business with ridiculously high margins. Those margins were so high it makes our margins as publishers look really small. But Verizon actively invested in a wireless business, set it up as a completely separate company, and this company was directly competing with this landline business that I had the opportunity to work in, directly competing to take that business. So smart move. The companies that didn't go that route, so AT&T and Sprint went that route, the others who didn't are not around. And I could name a bunch of them. They are not around. So that, again, an interesting food for thought in terms of how we think about our future and how you set up. I think on the second side, in terms of pursuing adjacencies, so as I mentioned, that landline business, it was basically dropping down because you had your own sister company trying to disrupt you and take away your customers and convince you don't need to be tethered to a wall at all. Disconnect your home line completely. And then you had cable companies and other companies, voice over IP, out there competing aggressively with you. And I remember I used to have meetings with the CEO, Ivan Seidenberg, and he would tell me, Judy, you've got to stop line loss in the home. And I'm like, Ivan, that will be like stopping world hunger. It is not going to happen. But what we can do is figure out what are these critical adjacencies to help us drive our business. And that really was the genesis or the foundation for the high-speed data and video business. I mean, because let's face it, when you think about a telephone company, what did you have? What were your assets that you could leverage to go into adjacencies? You had a relationship with the customer, all these customers that you were communicating with, even just by a bill on a monthly basis. You had access to the home, huge pipes. And let's face it, all of us know if you have access to the customer and they're already your customer, it's a hell of a lot easier to sell stuff to existing customers than it is to find new customers. So that really was the driver behind actually expanding into the data and video side. And I had the luxury of running marketing when we launched Fios, which was the first entree into the whole video business. And I'll tell you something really fascinating. We did not launch Fios with the Verizon name, with the telephone company name. And it was deliberate. We had done research and found out that customers' perception of a telco's ability to actually provide good quality TV service was close to nothing. And we knew we had an incredible product and we didn't want it tainted by customer perception. So we launched it without any association to Verizon. Didn't have the Verizon red and black colors, didn't have the Verizon name, it was in pastels, it was simply Fios. And we built up a great, within a year, had tremendous penetration in the markets where we rolled it out. And then that's where we transitioned to Verizon. So again, that's an incredible example of actually pursuing an adjacency and successfully driving the business. Now the whole Fios end is the core driver of that side of the business. And the last point in terms of continually reevaluating your business and having the courage to basically say, this is not going anywhere and we need to make changes. There's this crazy guy that I remember that I worked with, and he was the head of strategy. I remember thinking he was like ancient, and I'm older than him now. But anyway, he used to always be saying that the intralata toll, the toll market, long distance, was going to go to zero. We're not going to get any money for that. And people would be like, oh my God, he's like Chicken Little. The sky is falling. There's no way in hell that's ever going to happen. The smart person in the company actually said, no, I think that could potentially happen. So how do we future-proof ourselves? And that was the advent of bundles and packages, and also like triple play, voice, video, and data. So anyway, I use all this as interesting. Again, telecom's different. But the playbook is so similar in terms of how you need to think about your business to build a sustainable future. So strategy for the long game. And then the other part is you've got to have an incredibly clear North Star. And it's interesting. I am so enamored with the concept of agility and agile companies. And I do lots of reading on it to get underneath that. How do some companies, how are they able to adapt and innovate where other companies are not able to, especially when markets are changing like crazy and there's a huge amount of complexity? And it's interesting, one of the things that you'll find, whatever reading you do on agile companies, there's one attribute that jumps out above all others, and that you have to have a North Star that grounds you and focuses you. And that North Star, it really makes sense that it's your customer. And so I also really enamored with Amazon and the success that Amazon has had. And I think they are an incredible example of an agile company. And let me give you a few reasons why I believe that, other than their huge size. 1994, Amazon was a bookseller. How many of us were booksellers in 1994? And how many of us are now one of the largest companies from a world cap perspective and the biggest employer in all of US? So 1994, they're a bookseller. Now, their depth and breadth of services all go from technology services all the way through to groceries and Whole Foods. I mean, how does that even make sense? And it's funny, I just saw that Amazon Web Services alone is a $20 billion business. $20 billion, which is amazing. But if you talk to anyone at Amazon, they will tell you that there has always been one very clear North Star, and that is their obsession with the customer, maniacally obsessed with the customer, and they don't define their customer in a narrow way. So they're continually focused on what are the unmet needs in their market, and given the capabilities of Amazon, how can we address those needs? And then on top of all that, you have Bezos, because customer obsession and focus has got to come from the top to set the expectation and model the behavior. Jeff Bezos today, still there's an email, jeff@amazon.com, where customers actually send complaints, recommendations, whatever to him. And does he read all of them? No. Does he read a lot of them? If you talk to people at Amazon, they'll tell you yes. So do you know what the most feared email is at Amazon? That is getting a forwarded email from Jeff. That's a forwarded customer email that went to Jeff. And in the subject line, it has a question mark. That's it. That's all that's there. And if you get that, you're the lucky person who gets it. You know you need to drop everything, and you need to analyze, figure out what's going on, come up with a recommendation, and fix it quickly. To me, that's what you definitely define as obsession with the customer and top-down modeled behavior. So I just wanted to share that because, again, I think that's a tremendous example of how you put the customer as your North Star and the impact of when you do so. And again, look at the size of Amazon and the incredible success from a bookseller in 1994. And I love Amazon, I must say. So it's clear that successful companies really know how to look at customers and their needs and put them first. They're maniacally focused on meeting a customer need. And my contention is when I think about disruption, and a lot of people say, oh, the cause of disruption, it's technology. All this technology in the market is causing disruption. My contention, no, technology helps, but the number one cause of disruption is unmet customer needs. I mean, if you are not meeting the needs of your customers, they're going to go somewhere else to get those needs met. I mean, that's logical. Boy, wonderful example is Uber. I mean, I love Uber. But of course, big unmet need. No one wanted to have to stand out in the rain trying to get a taxi when you needed to catch a plane or had an appointment and you had no idea if the taxi was going to show up. Huge unmet need. No one wanted to have to deal with, remember the days right before Uber, taxis only took cash. You know, how do you know you have enough cash for what the taxi fare is, and if you run into traffic, you have enough to cover the bill? So big unmet needs in the market. Taxi cab industry had the capability to address those needs better than anyone else. They had the fleet, they had the people, they had the drivers, but they were asleep at the wheel, literally and figuratively. And that's opened the door for Uber. And again, I just use that as an interesting example of when there's unmet needs, someone's going to go in there and figure out how to meet them. And so my contention is when you think about our industry, I mean, we serve a bunch of segments. We serve the libraries, and a lot of times libraries, you know, I know from a Wiley perspective, you look at them as well because they're paying they're paying the bulk of the bills. And you have government, you have hospitals, you have corporations, you have governments, all as your customers. But I really contend the most important customer that we have, that all of us have, is the researcher. Absolutely, hands down, the most important customer. Because if you think about the researcher, they're both the beginning and the end of our ecosystem or our food chain. And matter of fact, if we didn't have the researcher, we wouldn't even have an industry. So in my mind, I think there's a lot more that we need to be doing to focus on those needs of the researcher to make sure that they could be as efficient and effective as possible. And I truly believe that's been a gap for us from an industry perspective, kind of part one, but I do see tremendous momentum and a change around that. And so it's interesting to me when you look at what's going on with a researcher. And matter of fact, at Wiley this week, we have a bunch of young early career researchers coming in. But if you look at changes in researcher behavior, they have clearly outpaced the changes in the scholarly and scientific publishing industry. They are ahead of us. So if we're not going to meet their needs, they're going to find a way to have those needs met through another organization or another way. In good examples, I mean, how many researchers are flocking to preprint servers because they believe our publishing process is too slow for them? My passionate belief, I don't think there would be a Sci-Hub or a ResearchGate, which we're all concerned about, if our researchers' needs were being met, if we were meeting those needs. Those two companies would not have even emerged. So I think we need to be really smart and really focused in how we look at researchers and what they need. And I passionately believe if we do the right things there, then we can build a very different future for all of us. And I don't know, how many of you like to read fiction? Anyone big fiction? Yeah, I'm a crazy fiction reader. To me, there's nothing better after a long, stressful work day. No, I never have stressful work days. Long work days, yeah. To go home and have a great novel and pair it with a wonderful glass of wine. And I read all kinds of fiction. I must say science fiction is not my favorite genre, but I do think when you look at William Gibson, he has some really great quotes. And this one I just love. And I think I'm really kind of embracing it because it kind of sets the stage for a lot of what we're dealing with. And he says, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. So my contention is the future is already here for our researcher. We just haven't, kind of gotten along there and addressed that. So I just wanted to kind of leave you with that thought. And so that kind of leads me to a point in terms of, okay, with our industry, when do you compete and when do you collaborate? And just so you know, to set the stage, I love to compete. I mean, I started my career in sales, been a sales and marketing person, but even before that, I've always been an athlete, I was a gymnast, and I love nothing better than really good competition and love nothing better than competing against a really talented field of people because it always raises the water level in terms of how you do. But I also recognize that there really is a time when collaboration can go an exceptionally long way. And so when I think about our industry and what we can and should do to build a really sustainable future that we're all happy about, I think we have an opportunity to turn our attention to collaborating to solve our researchers' problems. I think there's more that we could do together versus just separately that will have a big impact. And again, interestingly, when I think about, I'm going to use another telecom example, which is crazy, but the telecom industry was ridiculously competitive, fiercely, way different than this industry. I think this industry is very collaborative and collegial. But yet, telecom industry came together very aggressively from a government relations and a lobbying perspective. And they did that on behalf of the customer. So could you imagine if there weren't open standards when you think about telephone communication, if each telephone company had a separate network and there was an interoperability, or if there were separate internets because stuff didn't connect because of open standards, what a disaster that would be for all of us as consumers of communication services or internet services. So I just use that as an example. There's tremendous opportunities where you can collaborate. And again, not that it ever should be inappropriate in any way. I don't want to say that. I just think there's things that we can do together to help us address some of these unmet needs. And to me, at the end of the day, a collective industry voice is way more powerful than a single one. But I think, and I might be harsh here because I'm new to this industry, but I mentioned kind of briefly, I see the publishing industry as more kind of collegial than any other industry I've ever been involved in coming together and working together in industry, forums like this. But yeah, we haven't really accomplished much together when you think about it. I mean, we have RA21, which to me is a great example of shared technology to get at researcher pain points. But I think that's one of the only examples of where we have really collaborated that has had an impact? Have we talked about a lot of stuff? Absolutely. Have we done it? My contention is no. And my belief is, given where we are from changes in the marketplace, given where we are from a customer perception of us, there is no time like the present to stop talking and really start doing. So that was a big push of the discussion today. I wanted people to start thinking about how we do that. And so I'm going to flip through there because I want to have a closing thought that on collaboration. And this is an interesting one. So if you think about Microsoft and Apple, boy, two massive competitors. They used to hate each other. Microsoft was the big closed empire, wanted everything completely proprietary. Apple was, oh God, think of Apple Store, everything wide open, have everyone come and join, one big happy family. And they never really could work together well at all. Then Nadella became CEO of Microsoft. Nadella brought to the table, I'm going to tie back in, a compelling long-term vision for the future. And that compelling long-term vision for the future was, let's get away from this focus on only device stuff in Android. Let's focus on what we need to do with Office Suite so we can innovate around our end-user customer needs. I mean, that's the long-range vision he was painting for Microsoft. You've got to think differently. So then you have Cook, who knew there was a sliver of opportunity with Microsoft, invites Nadella down to Cupertino for a meeting. The net effect was Office 365 was made for the new iPad Pro that was coming out. So it was a start of great collaboration between two companies who did not collaborate before. And if you do any reading on Nadella, he talks a lot about partnership and the importance of partnership. And his comment always is that partnership doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where there is a partner that wins at the other one's expense. And if you do it correctly, basically what you can do is absolutely increase the pie. So the partners, as well as the customers, actually win. And so my final kind of comment for this whole group is, how do we partner together to make that pie bigger so we can do a better job on behalf of our North Star, which is the researcher? So that's final thought that I want to leave you with. And I don't know if I went over time, right on time. So with that, I will stop.
Judy, if we give her a round of applause, please.
Yeah, thank you.